Today I'm going to talk about sourcing. So often when we talk about recruiting, we kind of lump sourcing and recruiting in together. And we think as HR professionals they're the same thing because we're often doing them in the same step. But these are really two different things. Recruiting is really that point of sale where we talk to the applicant and we're trying to get somebody to apply for a job. So they're out in the labor pool and we're trying to convert them into an applicant in the organization. Sourcing is more about the labor pool in general. So it's looking at the entire labor pool and saying, where are our qualified applicants at, or where can I find those qualified applicants? So when we think of sourcing, we have internal sources inside the organization. So these are the employees, maybe we brought them in as entry-level positions and we're growing them inside our organization. Generally, we have an idea of what percentage we want to hire from internally. So some organizations have a huge percentage, so they have a huge commitment to hiring internally. They have great training and development programs to develop their employees and move them into successive positions. But some of the applicants will come from outside the organization. Some organizations have a bigger focus on recruiting outside the organization. And this is often the case where there's a labor shortage, so there's high demand for a certain type of labor. So sourcing is really about looking internally and externally. When we look externally, we're trying to determine, from the relevant labor market. So if we have a job and we're hiring locally, then our relevant labor market would be local. If we have a job that is hiring regionally or statewide, then that's our relevant labor market. And if it's nationally, then it would be nationally. We would look at the national demographics. And so when I'm talking about labor market and demographics, I'm talking about these are the individuals who are ready, willing, and able to work and who are potentially qualified for the job. So not just anybody out in the labor pool, but those who may be qualified for the job. So when you think about, say, the low-skilled, low-wage labor market, most likely anybody who is ready, willing, and able to work could fill that job, right? So you're looking at the demographics of the entire area. These would be the protected class demographics that we may be looking at to make sure that we're providing equal opportunity. So that brings up the concept of equal opportunity in the sourcing plan. So equal opportunity starts in the sourcing plan. A lot of times HR professionals look at the organization, so who has been hired into the organization and where are they? What was the flow, when we look at the labor market as compared to the demographics in our organization, and we see that there's a disparity. What HR professionals tend to want to say is that it must be the supervisor's part. It must be that point where they're hiring. So when we look at the relevant demographics and we start talking about protected classes, so protected classes being race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, genetic information, and age. So all of these are inclusive of everyone in that demographic except for age. Age is exclusive. So age covers 40 and over, whereas race and gender are inclusive of all races and all genders. So when we talk about the demographics of the local area, so if it was the local labor market, we would be looking for the Bureau of Labor Statistics or any other relevant source of information that could tell us who our qualified applicant pool is and what are the demographics of that applicant pool. So why is this important to equal employment opportunity? Well, when we start talking about sourcing, so where our applicants come from and where our qualified applicants are, we need a sourcing plan. We need to know where they're coming from, right? So what we want to do is say that this particular source has this demographic makeup. This particular source over here has this demographic makeup. And then we track those sources. We track what types of protected classes are coming from each one of these demographics, right? And then when we look at who's coming into our organization, so we're looking at, so the first one was the stock statistics. Those were the individuals available in the labor market. And then we look at the flow statistics. So how many of the people from different types of demographics are coming into our organization, so they're applying, and then they're being interviewed in our organization, and then we're offering them jobs. So remember when I was talking about the supervisor, that's the last step before they get into the organization, is being offered a job by the supervisor. So we need to make sure that all the steps preceding the supervisor are appropriate, and that we have a diverse group of applicants from a protected class perspective flowing into the organization. That's where the basis of equal employment opportunity should come from. So then when we look at the selection ratio, so if we have a representative group of protected classes coming into the organization from the staffing function, then the selection ratio should be approximately equivalent to the demographics coming into the organization, right? And then when we look at the number who have gone into different areas of the organization, so the concentration, where they're concentrated in the organization, it should again be representative of the demographics of your relevant labor market. So when we talk about relevant labor market, I mentioned the local labor market, but what if it is a type of job where there is a reduced number of applicants from one type of protected class? So let's look at the HR profession. When we look at the HR profession and we look at the national statistics on the HR profession, a substantially larger number of women in the profession than there are men. That means that men are underrepresented in the profession as a whole. So when we look at the appropriate labor market, so the qualified labor market, and we look at who we're bringing into the organization, then we would expect that there would be fewer men in the applicant pool. So if we know this going into the sourcing plan, we may say that, well, we need to look for sources of labor where there are higher concentrations of men, so that we can make sure that we're pulling in a diverse group of applicants from a gender perspective, knowing that there is a lack of gender diversity in the profession. So this is something that you would do for all of the protected class characteristics. When we talk about equal employment opportunity and we talk about the ability to bring people into the organization, we need to be thinking holistically, not only what is available in the labor market, but where we can find individuals so that we have a balanced sourcing plan. So then the question becomes, well, what if there are not sufficient numbers in the qualified labor market? So we just talked about the disparity between men and women in the HR profession. So what if there is a disparity? And this could be based on racial characteristics as well. How do we address that? And when should we address that? So when we start talking about ethics in the organization, I've heard recently in the news and in speeches, as a matter of fact, where people have said, well, you know, when you have a choice between two applicants and the second best applicant is from an underrepresented group, maybe you should give that one the opportunity over the most qualified applicant. Well, that's discrimination, right? Because you're making an employment decision based on a person's demographics, not related to the job itself. When we talk about affirmative actions and equal employment opportunity, affirmative actions are proactive, positive actions an employer can take to ensure equal opportunity. Affirmative action plans are plans that are in place to make sure that if there was historical discrimination in the organization, that the organization redresses that discrimination, so that specific discrimination. So if there happened to be gender discrimination in the organization and it was in a particular work group, well, then they may be required to have a quota to redress that discrimination in that department based on that gender discrimination or whatever the discrimination was. Once that discrimination has been redressed, then the organization would be expected to follow other guidelines of policies, practices, training, procedures in order to ensure continued equal employment opportunity. But the affirmative action program is in place for a specific period of time and then it goes away. But affirmative actions should never go away. Affirmative actions are positive, proactive actions on the behalf of the employer to ensure equal employment opportunity. Those include your sourcing plan. Those include internal sourcing, training and development, promotion opportunities for different demographics. And that's not preferential treatment. That's programs and policies and practices within an organization that are providing opportunities to everyone. So let's talk about those opportunities, because that's really the issue, right? So if you have a group that is underrepresented in the organization and they're not qualifying as the most qualified applicant, and you have a lack of individuals in the applicant pool who are qualified, what does your organization do? Well, I would argue that even if there isn't a lack of qualified people in the organization, but if there is an underrepresentation of a group, whether it be race or gender or other demographics that need to be addressed in society as a whole, how do we address this? So that is a good ethical and moral question, because it shouldn't be at the point of decision making in the employment process where you're actively discriminating against another candidate. So here are some ideas. Internships. Organizations often promote internships to help individuals acquire the knowledge, skills, and abilities. But what if the individual who is trying to acquire those knowledge, skills, and ability is from an underrepresented group and happens to be low income or a single parent or working from paycheck to paycheck? This person's working full time, going to school, and can't take an internship because many of the internships are from 8 to 5, during the traditional working week when this individual would typically be working. Well, organizations can brainstorm about how they can provide internships to these non-traditional students who are often in underrepresented groups. Stretch assignments and projects. You have an internal development of employees, and some of those employees are in the same situation. They just don't have access to the traditional opportunities that other groups do, maybe more affluent groups. And if they're in a disadvantaged economically or from a lack of information, sometimes it's just a lack of information, how do we address that? Making sure that these individuals who are in a lack of resources and information and financial resources are getting the things that they need in order to be the most qualified applicant. What about the lack of information I just mentioned? That's mentorship programs. This can be a mentorship program in your organization. It can be a mentorship program with local students. So we have, as an HR organization, we have the Society for Human Resource Management. We have Texas State Boards. So here in Texas, we've got Texas SHRM. And then we have local professional organizations. Here locally, we have CTHRMA and we have Wilco HR. So it is the responsibility of the profession to provide mentorship to underrepresented groups. Some of it is just about not understanding good decision making. And I see this in most every student. It's not just one particular type of student, but most every student that I've encountered has a lack of insider information because they're not on the inside. And this is often what prevents people from moving forward in an organization, just a lack of insider information. Well, how have things been done, or how do you do things, or what are the politics surrounding this particular scenario? Unless you know to look for the politics surrounding it, it's not something that you would look for. Sometimes you have to have a mentor that helps coaches and guides you in all of these various types of knowledge that's lacking to move forward. So professions, they need to look at underrepresented groups in their professions. So for the Society for Human Resource Management, Texas SHRM, there should be some type of focus on attracting men into our profession, because we have an underrepresentation of men in our profession. Providing mentorship to students. I think that the disconnect between the student organizations and the professional chapters, there just needs to be more connection between the state and the local chapters in order to provide that needed mentorship. I think most students are starving for that mentorship, and that's certainly something the profession can provide. Scholarships not based on GPA. So when we start talking about a group of students who have to work full-time, who may be a single parent and can't devote a large portion of their day to studies, or they're spacing it out with part-time school, the GPA may not be the most important thing in their life because they have to put food on the table for their kids. And so providing scholarships that are not based on GPA, but based on interest in the profession or some other criteria that's not eliminating underrepresented students would be very beneficial to the profession. Another thing is that colleges and universities need speakers in the classroom. Students who are in underrepresented groups, once you graduate, you should come back and talk to other students who are in your demographic and explain to them how you were successful. What steps did you take? What was your journey? People who are already successful, go to colleges and universities and offer to speak. We are always trying to connect with people in the profession. Career advice and guidance, I think that would be number one. Most students here, this is the steps or process that we need to take, but it's not necessarily informed with what people who have actually been successful in the profession have done. And I think this is true of every profession, that every profession needs more connection between students and people in the profession to help guide students in good decision making. For example, some students think that I should get my degree so I'm knowledgeable about my profession, and then I should go look for an internship. But by the time they graduate, they're also looking for a job, and they don't have the skills, the application of the knowledge that they acquired in college in order to get the job. So they're not the most qualified applicant. So going back to that speaker that said you should take the second most qualified, give those students that advice. Look, you need to be going out and getting these skills while you're in college. And that goes back to the students who are working full time. Organizations, professional organizations, and employers need to have more opportunities for students who are in underrepresented groups, especially low-income students who can't take traditional internship opportunities. What type of projects or programs can you put in place that can help these students acquire the skills and be the most qualified applicant for the job? Finally, some students, especially underrepresented students, have struggles. They are struggling with some major issues, whether it be a disability or being a single parent or any number of other things. Some of the things that I have heard from students that they are struggling with to overcome just to be in the classroom have just been phenomenal, just unbelievable. And having somebody to help them create a narrative about how do I explain this to an employer so that they understand that I have persistence and I have adaptability and I have drive. I've had things in my life that I've overcome. Just helping them script these things in a way that puts them forward as an awesome applicant, because most of them are. It requires some interaction between the professional and the student. So, okay, a little bit on my soapbox there. We need more interactions between professionals and students. So going back to sourcing is as you can see, quite varied. When you start talking about the HR perspective and the staffing part of it, the internal sourcing, the external sourcing, it really overlaps affirmative action, it overlaps equal employment opportunity, ethical decision making, making sure that you are making decisions based on the most qualified applicant, but also how are you describing that applicant, making sure that you're describing that applicant, that most qualified applicant, in a way that doesn't unnecessarily exclude a perfectly qualified applicant that maybe is in a different demographic. And then thinking about sourcing and qualified applicants from a more holistic and societal perspective. How can we give back to our profession? How can we, as successful professionals, give back to those around us who need advice and guidance so that they can become some of the most qualified applicants that we're recruiting as employers? So all of those things are quite interesting to think about, and I think from the perspective of society and our organization, we need to think more about how we can help those in need, all of those in need, all of our citizens, and how we can help bring them into being qualified applicants for jobs. and how we can reward people for the efforts that they make to be there. So, all right, sourcing.